questions in the Q&A button, and we really hope to hear from you. Now, you can watch all these films and more AAPI stories on air and streaming on World Channel. And you can watch them on air TV, yes, if you still watch your TV. And of course, you can stream them on the PBS app as well. Now, we got some housekeeping I want to go over with before we get started. I want to explain how this works. Some of you may be familiar with Zoom. Some of you may or may not have been on a Zoom webinar before. So want to let you know that you won't see yourself on video and you will not be able to speak during the event. But that's okay because we still want to hear from you. So you can ask your questions in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen and you just tap it in your question. So there's a bar at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. Tap that. And if you see a question that you also want to hear the answer to, vote for it by clicking the thumbs up and move it up to the top of the list. And we will do our best to ask the most popular questions. We have a couple of films dealing with elections, so it's only fitting that you get to vote for your questions as well. Zoom has recently rolled out an auto captioning feature that we want to make sure that you're aware of so participants can enjoy today's event. We know not all of you may see the button, so we apologize if it's not visible for everyone. But if you want to activate the closed captioning feature, try to look for the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And there's 2 transcription display options to pop up. We recommend that you select the subtitle to enable the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. Now, you can also select full transcript and a sidebar window will pop up where you can actually see what the speaker is saying. So bear in mind the closed captioning might still be delayed and there might be some typos, so please forgive us for that. Okay, are you guys ready to get started? Well, I'm going to introduce this first film, which basically happened because I got dragged on a trip to Mississippi about 6 years ago. So here is the trailer for Far East Deep South.
Growing up, it was always kind of a mystery about my dad and his side of the family. Whenever my brother and I would ask him about my grandfather, he would just say, oh, it's a sad story, it's not a big deal. One day we came across this photo of a gravestone, and that's when my dad finally told us that this is where my grandfather and great-grandfather were buried. But not in China, in Mississippi.
Chinese people in Mississippi? What happened there?
I actually don't know where we're going and where we're going.
Last thing I thought I'd ever find in Mississippi was a Chinese museum.
I guess there was more than just my grandfather and my great-grandfather.
When the Chinese first came to the Delta, they were treated like we were.
Everything was very segregated. I mean, it was black, white. We were just really in the middle.
I had to attend a segregated one-room schoolhouse.
Growing up, I read about segregation, and I thought that it only affected the black community.
I just didn't really think that it happened to the Chinese, too.
What?
Great-grandpa!
Oh my God! I knew all your family.
It is so important for people to know what happened with the Chinese Exclusion Act and how it affected Chinese Americans throughout the nation, including the South.
Streaming now on GBH World Channel.
Well, I'm going to welcome in my co-producer of Far East Deep South, and that is Mr. Baldwin Chu.
Whoa!
He's making an entrance. Okay. Did we sign an insurance waiver? No.
We have rental insurance.
So you're my co-producer. You're also my partner for life.
In crime.
Yes, partner in crime. We are married, if you didn't know that.
Oh,
so
that's good for me to know.
That is very good for you to know. And we took this trip 6 years ago to Mississippi, and hilarity ensued. No, tears started flowing.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to look into your father's history more?
Well, really, it was for my daughter. I mean, I didn't know what a relationship with a grandfather actually was until I saw my daughter being held by my dad. And so when we went out to Mississippi for the first time, or when we found out about my grandfather and great grandfather being buried in Mississippi, we thought it would be a good opportunity to go out there.
And I thought it was just astounding that there were more than just your grandfather and great grandfather buried in Mississippi. I thought they were going to be the only Chinese there. And when we stepped into the Mississippi Delta Heritage Museum, and I just saw families, generations, so many people that had been in the South, and yet we never heard about that. That was just so surprising to me, and why we really wanted to make the film as well. What has been the response from people so far to your family's story?
Well, certainly a lot of people were able to relate to the Asian American experience, especially the Asian Americans here, about how my father wasn't really willing to share, or it was how difficult it was to talk about the past. But I think overall, in general, the response has been really great, because people are learning things that we didn't even know, right? They're learning about this history. They're learning about this untold story of the early Chinese in the segregated South. And a lot of people are just amazed that this history was never taught to them, and that they're finding it now.
Right. And I really love the fact that a lot of people have been saying, like, we need this to be taught in schools. And that was a lot of the reason we made the film as well, is that we want to really broaden the way that American history is taught, so that it's more inclusive of not just the API experience, but other groups that have been traditionally underrepresented. Now, there's a famous scene in our film that we'll try not to spoil too much. Some of you may have seen the film, but we go into the Mississippi Delta Heritage Chinese Museum, and we find a specific artifact, a very important book. I'll spoil a little bit. So we find your grandfather's Bible. Slight spoiler alert.
There's plenty of other spoilers.
There's other amazing revelations in there. And we didn't plan this at all. A lot of people are like, oh, is that staged? I'm like, no, when everything that you see in our film, it happens as it happened. So a lot of people want to know, where is the Bible now?
Where is that Bible now? Well, hopefully you saw the film, and if you haven't yet, you'll get a chance to, and you'll see that this spoiler of the Bible being revealed is in the Delta Museum
in Cleveland, Mississippi. It is still there. It is now on loan.
But they did give us the Bible back. It does belong to us now, but yes, it is back on loan at the museum, where it is safe and for all to enjoy. So go visit the museum. Right?
Yes. When it's safe to travel. It's a little bit more safe now. What were some surprising lessons that you took from searching out your grandfather's past? Because we really didn't know we were going to find anything. I mean, we literally thought we would take a family trip, visit a gravesite, and then come home. And here we are. We made a whole documentary about it. And how might this be something that we kind of teach our daughter and, hopefully other generations about family history?
Well, definitely learning about family history, I believe now is important. I guess when I was younger, I didn't think much of it, because I didn't know that it would really apply to me, right? But understanding not only our family's history, but the history of our nation, I think really helps our children understand where they belong. I definitely want my daughter to grow up. Can we give a spoiler? She's a multi-generational American, let's just say that. And I don't want her to grow up and thinking that she doesn't belong in this country. And I don't want her friends to look at her, or strangers to meet her for the first time to look at her and automatically assume that she is not an American, or she doesn't belong in this country.
Yeah, and we talk about identity and this sense of belonging as a big theme in our film, and the whole idea that, if you look at an Asian face, you don't necessarily think we belong here. And I would say several other groups also experience that, Latinx community, the Arab American community, where the default thinking is, oh, we must not be from here. Mm-hmm. And so why is it important for us to kind of dispel the perpetual foreigner myth?
Well, I mean, the film starts out with a statement where I'm contemplating in my mind when people meet me for the first time and they ask me, hey, so where are you from? And I would just say, well, San Francisco. I was born in San Francisco, raised in Sacramento. And the next question is almost always, but where are you really from, right? And they're insinuating that I am not really from America, right? It doesn't matter how many generations I go back, I'm not from here, I'm not here, And so I think that's really the context of how I would feel. Is we would really want people to understand our belonging.
Yeah, and why again is this important for us to push this out, into the education system and to just the general public in general?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, we're hearing about all these recent anti-Asian things going on, and when we hear about these anti-Asian American things, it's really not anti-Asian American, it's really anti-American. But the problem is that so many people in our country don't view us as American. They only see us as a foreigner. So I think understanding our history, understanding our place, understanding the significance of all the different Asian communities for hundreds of years, not just like 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years, for hundreds of years, I think it's very important.
Now, what was some other surprising things that we discovered when we went to Mississippi?
Well, certainly the discovery of the early Chinese Americans living in the same community as neighbors with a Black community. Something I definitely was not expecting, did not really understand. And to see that they had a common shared history and common struggles, and the ability to work with each other, live in harmonious conditions with each other and understand each other and even fight for each other.
Well, I think that was one of the things that was very surprising to me as well, was the fact that we kind of lose sight of where we are in history now versus back then in a pre-civil rights era, where people of color could not walk in through the front door of businesses and establishments. And the fact that a lot of the Chinese owned businesses, even Black owned businesses, people could walk through the front door. Someone African-American could walk through a Chinese grocery store, which is what the majority of Chinese in that area eventually operated grocery stores, just like your grandfather and your great grandfather.
Yeah, certainly that was a testimonial we got from the Black community, and it was amazing for them to actually, we were worried that they wouldn't want to talk to us because we were just, different, but that wasn't the case. They loved talking with us. They loved sharing their stories. They loved thinking about when they were children and all the relationships they had when they were children with the early Chinese grocery store owners and their children. And it really touched my heart, and it teared me up a lot of times during these interviews.
Well, and your dad goes through a very emotional journey, speaking of tearing up. Yeah. What has that experience been like for him, and maybe even for you and him as father and son?
Well, for those that don't understand really the Asian American culture, maybe I should say, is that like a lot of us, especially the older generations, first-time immigrants, don't show their emotions. They're very, and they go through a tough time, and they really don't want their children to really experience that. It's not like in America, it's like, show us your feelings. Like my dad was like, what feelings, right? He's like, he didn't have any feelings.
My favorite line in our film is when one of the older gentlemen, it's like his parents just, when he was being, had racist taunts thrown at him, he's like, just suck it up.
Yeah. And my dad wouldn't even address them. He wouldn't even tell me to suck it up. He just go on, just whatever, right? But I think after this experience, he really understands the importance of sharing your stories with each other. It's okay to show emotions, and even though he's still a very private person, he doesn't really like seeing himself cry on TV and letting people see him cry. I think he understands that the emotions is important because it humanizes the things that we have all gone through, and it humanizes who we all are. And those things are just that makes people think of you differently.
Yeah, and I know that we have a couple of questions here specifically to our film, and it's like, is there a large Chinese community there now, and what are the race relations like today among whites, Blacks, and Asian Americans?
In that area, there are fewer Chinese there now. In fact, the store owner that's in our film just recently sold his store, so he's no longer there. But there are still Chinese people in the Mississippi Delta. There's just not as many of them.
Yeah, and certainly the race relationships are slightly different. I mean, they're actually, we're talking about this with our friends Gilroy Chow and Eddie Young, who still live there. They actually feel safer there than they do looking at kind of the big cities, because they've been so integrated with the community now.
Well, all that comes down to relationships, and I think that's what our film really highlights. It's the relationships of the people that are the most important things. And so when they're in a town where everybody knows everybody, the Chinese knows the Blacks, knows the whites, and they're all kind of together, they have friendships, they have relationships. It's harder to be fearful of somebody that you actually know, right?
Yeah, and to be clear, there is still some tension between the white and the Black community. I think those deep seeds of slavery and segregation, the impact of that, there is still to an extent a mistrust from communities, but on an individual relationship, things have been in a better place. And this kind of goes to the question when we have another attendee saying, were Asian Americans seen as a cushion between Black and white communities, and did AAPI members have their own neighborhoods? So the AAPI community
There was
mainly live in the black
in the
neighborhoods.
There was no
They couldn't-
Chinatown in the South.
Yeah, they couldn't live in the white neighborhoods. And they were, in a sense, in the middle, where they were able to forge friendships with both the white and the black community over the generations. I mean, we actually heard from some of the black citizens that were saying, like, when the Chinese first came to the Delta, when they were recruited to replace some of the freed slave labor, they were actually looked down upon as even less than the black community, as really foreign, foreign people. So, over time, the definition of race, I think, in the South has also changed. So what do you hope people will take away from the film?
Well, I definitely hope people will normalize the understanding and conversation of what it means to be Asian American, and that they really are able to consider us as Americans, to understand that there's been contributions, there has been discriminations, there's unfortunately dark history in our country, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand and know that history to learn how we got to where we are today. Because we're all trying to make the future better in this country. And for us to ignore the past isn't going to help us create a better future. Yeah,
and you can retain your cultural identity and heritage, just like somebody who's Italian American or Irish American, and still be, Asian American. And yet we want the general American public to accept us as American.
Yes.
So that's why we're celebrating these stories. You're going to see a whole diverse array of other stories. We're going to go now from Mississippi to New York to meet a young group of performers. This is Curtain Up.
5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
PS 124 Theater Club is an award-winning after-school program based in Chinatown.
Most of our kids are Asians. Asians can perform.
There's something about music and dance that moves the soul. This is about being a part of America.
I like everything about acting. I don't know how to describe it, I just like it.
I don't have a lot of confidence. I don't know why, actually.
It's easier to be scared than happy.
Who's Asian here?
Me, not you!
You! Yeah, because I'm Chinese Asian.
I'm 100% Chinese.
你为什么中国人都不会中文呢?
She sides with China in the Olympics and I side with the US.
Yeah.
And then she gets so angry. And you know what my mom told me? Asian people are horrible at acting. Cannot be acting.
This is important. This is your last show here. You have to be proud of this.
Charlotte, that's so good. Be a good girl. That's what this point is, okay? That's not okay, Russell.
That's not holding hands. This is holding hands, right? You guys can do it too. Whose foot was involved with William's head?
I did it. I'm not doing this.
I didn't kick in his head or smack him.
It's probably like a second or three after realizing that it doesn't get you a lot of money. And then I'll finally realize acting isn't my real thing, but I still won't give up and I'll still do acting.
I thought I could really actually maybe become an actor, but you don't know when life throws you curveballs, so you never know.
Streaming now on GBH World Channel.
Let's welcome the filmmaking team from Curtain Up, Hui Tong and Kelly Ng. And Kelly and Hui are actually coming in from Asia. So thank you for, I think it's in the middle of the night. Is that correct?
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
1 a.m.
Well, thank you for staying up late with us. I want to just say I haven't had a chance to talk to you both about the film, but when I first saw it, I felt such a strong connection because I was a theater kid. I started doing theater when I was 7 years old, and had I not been Asian American, I would have been a theater major in college. And so this was such an important film, I think, for us to see. How did you learn about the school, and why did you decide to feature this school and these kids?
Cool. I'm so happy to hear about your connection to theater. So great. So it was summer 2018, and it was when Crazy Rich Asians come out. And everyone was talking about Asian representation in Hollywood. And I was also a theater enthusiast in college. I did a lot of directing and acting in theater. So I was thinking, how about the theater? Asian American theater communities. And New York City is a center of kind of like theater. So I just started out doing research and reporting on the Asian and Asian American theater communities. And it's quite interesting because what were more familiar for us, if we define Asian American theater, is either an Asian cast doing Asian story, like Asian theater piece, or like Asian actors doing in a very diverse cast doing like non-Asian or Western shows. But what I've been seeing more and more nowadays is like Asian cast reproducing or like remaking mainstream and classic pieces. So basically like making the mainstream things like Asian. So that's kind of the third way of doing theater for now. So I just found out this theater program by Lee, who's the founder of the theater club, and the principal Alice Hong. So they have this great theater program in a Chinatown school. So the school, Yongwen School, is basically at the center of the Chinatown. It's like serving like over 95% Asian American kids. So I heard about this theater club. It's like all like Chinese or Asian American kids doing like Disney shows, like mainstream, iconic American shows. So that's kind of like naturally having certain like cultural tension there. I visited the school. I saw the kids doing Aladdin at that time. That was, and the kids were super, super energetic and welcoming. So I started shooting the next day after my visit, and Kelly joined me like a month later. So yeah, that's how the journey began.
Well, I love hearing that, because I think the AAPI representation in theater just historically has been sorely lacking. And again, I mentioned that's a lot of the big reason I didn't go into theater. I did get a chance to collaborate. I'm also a music composer in addition to being a documentary filmmaker, and I have been a performer too. And so you're right. I have been asked to audition for all the Asian roles in all the musicals. And I worked with C.Y. Lee, who had written the Flower Gem song. And, for us to even, he had a track record with Rodgers and Hammerstein. And for us to even try to mount even a new musical, we felt a lot of resistance. What is the message that you hope to convey about Asian American Pacific Islanders and the theater through your film?
I think, I hope we've tried to incorporate some of this into the film, that each of these children, because we kind of spotlighted a couple of the kids, and their experiences are very unique and different from one another, depending on like their family background and just their interests. Some of them are in theater because they want to be actors and actresses. Some of them are in theater because, they just want to, it's kind of like an activity for them to be engaged in outside of like their schoolwork. So I think what we really hope to convey is that there's no one single defining Asian American experience, and also looking at their family, their relationships with their family members, and how, this whole idea of like pursuing your dreams, it's easy to trot out a cliche like that, but that there are different factors that sort of like complicate it. And yeah, it's like, so we just really hope that this would be timely at a time in a season like that, where, there's increasing, I guess you could call it, misunderstanding within towards the Asian American community, that this could sort of just bring some cheer, and that, our viewers can see that the ups and downs of these kids growing up and developing their senses of self.
Yeah, adorable kids. You can't go wrong with that formula. We have a question from the audience. Do you think this theater club has changed the trajectory for any of the kids to pursue the arts? And perhaps more importantly, have any parents' minds been changed?
I think for the kids themselves, of course, I think at their age, they're like age 10 or 11. They actually need like constant support and encouragement, and definitely the existence of this theater club kind of constantly reminding them that they can do arts, they can do theater. And during the pandemic, although the kids were staying at home, but some of the teachers in the theater club are still hosting online theater camps, and some of the main characters, the main kids in our film, is actually still doing online theater camps, and they're sending us the links of their YouTube links of them performing with other kids online. So I guess they're still doing well, and I guess definitely the theater club has been a very important part in their life. We cannot tell if they're actually going to be actors or actresses in the future, but this is definitely an important part of their life.
Yeah, and Kelly, how about the parents? Like, have you kept in touch with them, and have you seen them change their attitudes?
I think, I'm also trying to not spoil the film too much, but I think throughout our experiences filming with them for, I guess, like over a year, we have sort of like noticed the parents not necessarily a very evident change, but their own struggles of wanting to support their kids in their interests, but at the same time, not really sure. Maybe this is something that you can resonate with, whether this is something, this is a career path that, it's a stable and, it's a respectable job and things like that. So I think we have sort of seen the parents share this with us, and like their very raw emotions and just the interactions with their kids when they talk about things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That struggle between, wanting something stable for your children and yet encouraging to pursue something creative and pursue something that they might be passionate about. And that's definitely a very common struggle. We have another question from the audience. With the Crazy Rich Asian films, programs like this, and I guess all our films, do you think we are seeing a blossoming of AAPI theater and art in America?
That's a great question. I think we're definitely seeing a great time as we can hope for. If you just look at the Oscars in the past 3 years, right, or other major film festivals or like awards, and we can definitely see more and more first something award from Asian women or other filmmakers or like artists. So yeah, I mean, I guess so. But there's still more stories. Because Asian American community itself is also a very diverse group. Has like definitely more stories to tell. And that's why we also focus on the children in our film, because they're the future storytellers, and we can hope for better things, I guess.
Yeah, and why do you feel like this theater program was so important for these kids?
I think it's very special because, as Hui mentioned, the school is right in the heart of Chinatown, New York, and most of them are Asian Americans, and they don't, as we have talked about earlier, that they don't traditionally have many opportunities to do theater, to do the arts. And the fact that there's a theater program that sort of pushes them beyond this traditional confines, I think gives them a lot of exposure. And they get to go on, there's this junior theater festival that's held annually, and kids from all over the country, all over the world actually come and present an item, and these kids get to go for opportunities like that. So I think it's really character shaping, confidence building, and I think it helps them to explore different options for the future as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what is your hopes in terms of being able to impact the theater community? Have other members of the theater and Broadway community seen the film? Hui or Kelly? Can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah,
okay.
We're actually, we're still in the process of doing the community outreach, but definitely there are theater people, especially we received personal private messages from prospective Asian American artists or actors or actresses telling us how kind of touched they were and how encouraged they were by the kids, kind of resonating with their experience growing up. So I guess, yeah, it's definitely making some impact on the theater community. And yeah, we're definitely glad that more and more people, especially with our streaming on our channel, there'll be more and more people seeing that. And yeah, I hope.
Well, we are so glad that Curtain Up is part of this lineup of films. So thank you both for joining us. And you're going to be back a little later, as well as Baldwin. We're going to bring all the filmmakers together towards the end of our conversation, if you're just joining us now. And now we go from New York to different parts of the country where we're going to be following some first-time voters. This is First Vote.
Being able to vote is a privilege. Not everybody gets to vote in the world.
Asian Americans are the country's fastest growing ethnic group, but until recently, they haven't voted in large numbers. Now, they're finding their voices at the polls.
我们入了籍就会投票.
In America's battleground states, how will these voters choose?
Make America great again!
When I think about how I want more Asian Americans to participate in American political life, this is not what I had in mind.
This is a democratic process.
那么他到了这个地方，他会把他这个从来没有拥有过的权利给他放大，因为有人听了。
First Vote on America Reframed.
Let's welcome the director of First Vote, Yi Chen. Welcome, Yi. How are you doing?
Hi, Larissa. Good to see you.
It's great to see you. And you have actually, I know, you worked on this film for the 2016 election, and now we've gone through another election cycle. What have you seen maybe has changed from the past election to this more recent election? Especially like, here, let me back that up. Okay. Do you feel like this film is still relevant today as it was back then when you first, because I think it gives great insight to voters. And how did you decide upon these 4 voters?
Yeah, so I started the project in after the 2016 election. So the story follows actually 4 voters organizing in North Carolina and Ohio from 2016 to 2018. So the storyline really focused on the 2018 midterms. So the 4 voters, I have 2, so 2 of them are Republicans and 2 of them are Democrats. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely, relevant, even when actually, this film is very special because it was released last year, and it was also my first time voting in 2020. So having made this film and, also voting in 2020, I feel like I have a much better understanding of voters in my own community. And the film really started out with a very personal connection because I am an immigrant. I came to the US in 2003. So in 2016, I actually was going through the naturalization process and becoming a first-time voter myself. So I was interested in understanding voters in my own community on both sides, particularly first-time voters like myself. So when I started working on the project in 2017, I was looking for characters in battleground states, and I found these 4 characters, and I was interested in understanding how their lived experiences shape who they are and how they vote.
Yeah, and I think I was struck by that because you really kind of followed them into their personal lives and their experiences. And I think that gave great insight to these voters. Now, how did you deal with the complexity? I mean, you kind of mentioned it a little bit here of how AAPI voters, because even with these 4, that doesn't necessarily represent everyone, but what was your approach in terms of being able to show all those different sides of them?
Yeah, so I think from a filmmaking perspective, the film is, it's a character-driven and it's observational film. So I filmed for 2 years and really spent a lot of time with these characters and getting to know them and understand who they are. I also had very unique access at the time to be able to have access to both sides. It was, it was a very divisive time, and actually one of the first questions. So I actually don't know if it would be the same film if I were to make it now, because at the time, one of the first questions that I was asked, particularly voters who are Republicans, was, are you, like Sue and Lance, they just asked me when I first talked to them, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? So at the time, I told them, I was becoming a citizen and about to vote for the first time. And I was really interested in learning more about voters in my own community and how democracy works. So that, I think, was a very unique situation that gave me the access, and I was able to spend a lot of time with them and build relationships and build trust and really very intimate access to their lives.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point because, you know, as a first-time voter, you're almost like asked to pick a team, right? And you're like, this is my first time. So what else was surprising, and what else did you learn as a first-time voter?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot. I learned so much. And you know, because I didn't grow up here and I came here for graduate school, I think a lot of the things that Asian Americans who are born and grew up here will learn about as an undergraduate about Asian American history, you know, like history of voting rights for Asian Americans. I was really, I didn't know that Asian Americans didn't have voting rights until 1952, and Jennifer and Kaiser's parents weren't they wouldn't be able to immigrate here if it wasn't for the Immigration Act of 1965. And so just, you know, a lot about Asian American history, and also specifically because the story took place in North Carolina and Ohio. At the time in 2018, North Carolina had the voter ID law on the ballot, and Ohio had a big voter purge going on in 2018. So those are the two things that I, you know, got to know a lot more because I was working on this film. And I think what you and Baldwin said earlier about, you know, the perpetual foreigner stereotype and, you know, model minority that I have personally experienced, but I really didn't understand it at the time. And working on this film, and there's a scene, Kaiser's daughter, you know, she talked about being asked where you're from. It made me realize I'm not alone. And talking to Jennifer, who is a critical race theory professor and anti-racism educator, you know, she taught classes on Asian American identity in the South. And it really made me also think about my own identity as an Asian American.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought those themes. And, you know, when I saw that scene in your film too, I was like, yep, see how common it is? Where are you from? Where are you really from? You just can't get away from it. We have a question from the audience, from Victoria. Have you checked back in with these voters to hear the reactions to the 2020 presidential election?
Yeah, we actually had a panel last year with all 4 of the characters. So I actually, if you're interested, it's actually, the recording is on our website, firstvotefilm.com, that you can actually check out that panel. I would say that 2020 versus what you see in the film, it's actually, they're still the same when it comes to, you know, voting and their political views. It's, you know, they're still pretty much the same, I would say.
That's very, very interesting. And people can be sure to check that out on your website. Speaking of one of your voters, I believe she's on here, Jennifer Ho. She's got a comment and question. For anyone interested in learning more about Asian Americans in the US South, I highly recommend Leslie Bau's Partly Colored, which talks about Asian Americans in the US South. And maybe we'll add that to our list of resources on our website. Her question for Yi, and she realizes she could just ask her on the phone, but I think she wants the audience to hear. She wants to know your thoughts on the article that just came out about the number of Chinese and Chinese Americans who contributed to the Proud Boys ahead of the January 6th insurrection. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the article or if you have a response to that.
Yeah, actually, the journalist, he actually, I did talk to him when he was working on the article. You know, before he approached me, I actually didn't know much about Chinese diaspora and Chinese Americans donating to the Proud Boys, which, then I think about it in retrospect, it's actually not that surprising because a lot of them are, supporters of voted for Donald Trump in 2016, 2020. So it actually, it does make sense. But I actually went back to one of the things that the reporter was interested in was because when I was working on the film, I was actually invited to join conservative groups on WeChat, which conservative Chinese American voters uses as an organizing tool and communications tool. So I searched for keywords Proud Boys and specifically that fundraiser around December last year, and so and I actually found by the way, I don't go into those groups and read the posts often at all, but I went in and I actually found a lot of surprisingly so many posts that are about that fundraiser and people donated. So I think it reminds me of when I first started doing research for the film, like Lance, who is featured in the film, that he actually founded a APAHM, and it's a national organization. They not only organize nationally to support Republican candidates, but they also donate through SEC, and he also worked on voter database. So they're actually more involved. They're involved in a very very deep level, right? So and I do encourage you to check out that article, which actually the journalist actually interviewed Jennifer and Kaiser in that article.
Well, we want to thank you, Yi, for joining us today. And you're going to be back with the rest of our group of filmmakers in a little bit. Please check out First Vote. It is fascinating. And now we are going to head over to Michigan to take a look at Hamtramck, USA.
I used to collect the list of graduates every year because I was really interested in the last names of the graduates, and watched that list of names shift to Bosnians in the early 90s, and then more and more Bangladeshi names and Yemeni names. And I've realized that I am probably the last in the 100-year line of Polish mayors.
Hamtramck, Michigan, has become the first Muslim-majority city in America.
Inshallah, you support me November 7th as well. Inshallah, we unify together as one. And inshallah, we accomplish the unaccomplished prior.
If you like to change, I have some idea to restructure and modify the administration.
If you care about this community and community's honor, come out and vote.
Feeling confident, feeling happy. This is our time to shine. আমি এই চিঠিটা আমার বাড়িতে কাউন্সিল করতে হাসান এর নিকট থেকে পেয়েছি। তিনি লিখেছেন যে তিনি বাংলাদেশি, ইয়ামেনি, পোলিশ, আফ্রিকান আমেরিকান এবং আমেরিকানদের সাথে কাজ করেছেন। কিন্তু নির্বাচনের দিন আমরা পোলিশ আমেরিকান, আফ্রিকান আমেরিকান, ইয়ামেনি, অথবা বাংলাদেশি এর কোনো পাই না। আমরা সবাই হলাম Hamtramck.
People didn't even think about who is being president of the United States, and tonight they want to know who will be the mayor of Hamtramck. 2 square miles.
Coming soon on GBH World Channel.
I'm happy to welcome the filmmakers of Hamtramck, USA, Justin Feltman and Razi Jaffrey. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Great to see you guys. First off, why did you decide to make this film about the Muslim community in Hamtramck and the impact on local politics?
Yeah, so in the 2016 election, I had come up to Michigan to work on a project around underrepresented voices in American democracy. And on working on that project, I met Razi, and he kind of helped connect me with some Muslim leaders in the community locally there in Southeast Michigan. And as the election results came in, we kind of thought, well, where do we go from here, and what can we do in this time to kind of, you know, as filmmakers, as first-time filmmakers, how can we kind of, you know, share our story, an important story we felt. And we wanted to kind of talk about Hamtramck when we came across Hamtramck, and we really thought this would make a great film. And we saw they had a mayoral election the next year, and it just immediately clicked for us that this would be the story we needed to tell. It was a movie, I mean, it was a community with a lot of negative press that kind of did this clash of the civilizations talk, you know, in the film. You know, a CNN host asks the mayor of Hamtramck, you know, that, hey, you're from a Muslim majority city, are you afraid? I mean, you know, this is the kind of narratives that were being talked about. And we thought, that's not this community at all. And so I immediately just left my camera equipment with Razi, said, I'm gonna move up here in a few months, just start shooting. And yeah, that's how we kind of got started.
I know, I was appalled when I heard that comment by that reporter. And, you know, Razi, why does Hamtramck attract such a diverse immigrant population? Give us a little backstory on the history there.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very unique community. I think, like a lot of places in the United States that have drawn immigrants from different backgrounds, it's a combination of things. It's sort of familial chain migration. It's also people moving there to look for jobs, a better quality of life. You also have a lot of people moving to places like Hamtramck from New York because it's a lot cheaper to live there as well. You have a huge influx of people coming in, you know, throughout the course of the 20th century to work in the automotive industry as well. I think the economics is the primary driver of what brought people there. Another factor historically in Hamtramck has been refugee and asylum seekers as well. So you had a lot of refugees coming in from the Balkans in the mid-90s. And then more recently, we've had a lot of refugees due to the Arab Spring in the Middle East and sort of turmoil that has been taking place in the contemporary Middle East. So we've had refugees from Syria, Iraq, Yemen that have been resettled in Hamtramck as well more recently.
Well, and I love the fact that it is so diverse. And, you know, in our film, Far East, Deep South, we focus on the diversity in the Mississippi Delta. And there was actually a Lebanese population there when the Chinese were there as well. And now we're looking at Michigan, a different state and a different part of the country. And of course, you guys are looking on a different side of the coin than First Vote was, where you're actually looking at the candidates. And so what does democracy look like in a Muslim majority city?
You know, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that, you know, we get asked about a lot, you know, since working on this film. And I think, you know, if you've seen the film, one of the things that becomes apparent is that democracy in a Muslim majority city looks like democracy in really any other place. It's messy and beautiful and complicated all at the same time. And I think one of the other things that you really learn from the experience of the film and the experience of the city is that the people that are getting involved in politics, they're taking up, you know, these leadership positions, they're running for office. Their main concern is a better quality of life for everybody in town. One of the stereotypes that gets levied against immigrants and other minorities who run for office or get involved in politics is that they only care about their own community. But there are a lot of issues in places like Hamtramck that affect every single citizen. So clean water, for example, it's a big issue in Michigan, has been an issue in Detroit and different parts of the Southeast Michigan. Safety, good schools, better roads, you know, these are all things that any politician would be concerned with for running for office in the area. And I think that's one of the things that's exemplified in the campaigns of the people running for office.
And that kind of answers one of our viewers' questions about the biggest issues in the election. Anything else that's unique to the city?
I wouldn't say unique, but, you know, they are, as Razi said, a lot of the concerns are infrastructure of the city. Another big concern, you know, it is Southeast Michigan, and, you know, it's a little bit of a post-industrial kind of town. For so long, it was held up by the auto industry. And since that has kind of faded, they're still kind of looking for that kind of replacement, and that's just not easily found. So, I mean, you know, that is something that people will talk about, is a need to kind of find on the south end of town, when it was originally a Polish town, there was the Dodge Main, and that became later a GM plant, and that's kind of now been shifting, and they're trying to find I think automated cars is the next thing that they're planning on for the factory. But there's that, and there's American Axle. So there's stuff like that they're, it is a working class town that's still looking for those kinds of solutions that, once were so promising in the region.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about how, there's different languages spoken in the city. So did language seem to be a barrier for voting and for even volunteers to be able to communicate with those during the voting process?
Well, I think one of the things that ends up happening is that in a place like this, in order to be a savvy and successful politician, you have to cater to constituents of all different backgrounds. And so that's one of the things that we see, particularly with Karen, for example, the incumbent mayor that's running for re-election, is very good at, visiting different houses of worship, attending, different celebrations and things like that. We saw also another candidate who's not prominently featured in the film, but Ian Parada, who has his signs and campaign materials translated into multiple languages, which is really incredible because you see Bangladeshi candidates have their signs, of course, in Bangladeshi and English, but then in multiple other signs in Polish and English and, different languages that are targeting the constituents, in the city. So it definitely plays a role. And I think the way that the candidates handle it is that they try to address it head on, and they try to target those voters by addressing them in their native languages.
Yeah, and speaking of the candidates, for themselves and in terms of entering local politics, how hard was it to break in and also be the front runners and in sense to become the new front runners in this majority of residents of Muslim in Hamtramck?
It's really tough. They're really up against a lot of things. And I think, we would be remiss to not acknowledge the trailblazers who ran for office, before and decades prior. So Hamtramck in the early 2000s had a city council member, Shahab Ahmed, who faced extreme prejudice and lots of problems, racism and, different types of problems, both in his campaign and as his tenure on city council. In fact, he had to seek police protection for himself and his family, and eventually had to move out of Hamtramck because things were just so tenuous, and so challenging for him, being there. But what he was able to do was set a precedence that blazed a trail and opened doors for people to come much later on. And then, of course, in the elections in 2011 and 2013 and 2015, both the kind of the city midterm elections and the city kind of the wider mayoral elections in the cities, you're slowly starting to see more and more people get involved. And I think it was 2015 when Hamtramck eventually ended up electing a Muslim majority city council represented by people from, Bangladesh and Yemen. And then in the 2017 election, you also had Fadl al-Marsoumi, who joined the city council, who's from an Iraqi background. And so I think, the sort of seeds for what happened today and this flourishing and burgeoning, Muslim campaigns and political initiatives were planted decades ago, with people getting involved earlier on.
No, it's important. It definitely takes time, but it's great to see some of that progress paying off now. This is another great question from our audience. Has Hamtramck, the community, seen the film? What was their response, and did it differ for different groups of residents?
Yeah, so where we were planning on having the film play at the Freep Film Festival, which is a local Detroit film festival. Obviously, because of COVID, it's been postponed. So hopefully this fall, we'll be able to bring it to the community. But at Doc NYC, we were able to share the film with the people in the film specifically. And we have gotten a few emails from people who live locally and, have some nice things to say. Everyone seems to have appreciated the tone, I think, especially when, you have the piece where all the other media coverage where it kind of does this clash of the civilizations kind of talk. It's nice to have a film that actually gives them the voice and allows them to share the story of the city and their own concerns. I think is a big draw for a lot of the people locally to feel that.
Well, I think it's a remarkable film that gives insight into another region of our country that, again, most people aren't aware of. Thank you, Justin and Razi, for being here and making this film. Don't go anywhere, because now we're going to bring the rest of our filmmakers back for it's not really a round table when you're on Zoom, but let's say square box panel. And we're going to bring our other filmmakers back. We're going to bring back Kelly and Hui and Yi, and we're going to have Baldwin wheel back in over here. So I'm going to move on over. And I know people are still asking questions in the Q&A, and we apologize if we don't end up getting to your questions, but we're going to try our best to get to as many as we can. Here he comes. And so, this month is AAPI Heritage Month, and we are celebrating these films that are being broadcast and streamed on World Channel this month on America Reframed. So just to kind of push this out there to all of you, why do you choose what stories, how do you choose what stories to tell? And you can speak to either this current film or even other projects that you choose to tell. Anyone who wants to jump in to start?
I guess I'll kind of start. I think one of the things that's really important is I think a lot of us talked about in our respective sessions and talking about our projects is it's really important that our stories are told from our own perspectives, and then B, that these stories are in fact told and that they get out there, because what we're talking about is American history. And the American political landscape, and Asian Americans are an inextricable part of that. So it's really important for this work to be done. For me, I think it's about proximity. I'm an immigrant myself from India. I'm Muslim as well. As a person of color and as a religious minority, those communities are most easily accessible to me. And I think as a marginalized community, that an accurate story needs to be told. So that's kind of what's driving me right now.
Certainly. I mean, I think we as filmmakers have the power to change hearts and minds through the stories that we tell. Anyone else want to chime in on, how you choose the stories and why those stories are important to tell? You can also jump in too, Baldwin, even though you're right next to me.
You weren't looking at me, you were looking at them. So I just wanted to reiterate what you just said, because I'm always thinking if we don't tell our stories, then either nobody else will, or they'll tell it inaccurately. And so it's kind of our job, it's our duty, right? It's actually if we don't do it, it's kind of a disservice to our community, and it's actually a disservice to the greater community, to the entire nation, for us not to tell our stories accurately.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that really quickly, I think, we also, on some level, we need to move beyond us just being able to only talk about ourselves. I think that as filmmakers and storytellers, we are also interested in other things, beyond an Asian American story or beyond a Muslim story, and I really commend, people like Chloe Zhao, with Nomadland, that we need to be able to tell stories and American stories. We are all people who are interested in other things, beyond our primary or secondary identities as well. And so I think we need to be valued for our ability as storytellers and filmmakers, and not just Indian or Chinese or Korean filmmakers as well. As I just really wanted to make that point as well.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there because I love that comment. Dr. Robert Voss actually talked to me a couple weeks ago. He's in our film. He's a white historian. And so he was in our film talking about history. And he told me, he was like, you know what? History does not belong to us, meaning white people, even though we wrote the history books. And now that I've seen your film and I know your history, history doesn't belong to you either, being Asian. And history doesn't belong to the Black community. History just is. And so if we tell everyone's story and allow everyone to tell their stories, and if we don't hide the truth, whether it's good or bad, from the past, then we all have a collective understanding of history. And that allows him as a white professor to talk about and teach about slavery and the segregated South. It allows people like us to talk about the white experience or the Black experience. It allows Black directors and filmmakers and historians to talk. Like we met a Black history professor who's teaching on the Chinese Exclusion Act in his university. So it allows, if everyone understands that history belongs to all of us, then it also allows us to understand history for all of us and teach it and experience it for everyone else as well.
Yeah, very, very good point. How about Hui, Kelly, and Yi? You know, what stories you think are important to tell, and you know, what impact do you hope that whether it's these films that we're talking about today or other films that you're working on have in the world?
I totally just want to echo what Razi and Baldwin said. Representation is so important, and AAPIs, we have such diverse stories, and but where stories are underrepresented. So it's really, really important to have representation. And I also want to say, as a filmmaker, that we need gatekeepers to actually show our films, give us a platform. I want to thank Word Channel for showing all these great AAPI stories during the May Heritage Month and putting together this panel. So we definitely need more gatekeepers to give us more platforms to uplift AAPI storytellers.
Yeah, no, thank you, World Channel, and the whole team. These are such important stories, and you're absolutely right. Gatekeepers are important. Hui and Kelly, you want to chime in with your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely appreciate what previously we talked about representing our own community. But I think for me, I mean, because Curtain Up is my debut feature film, I feel like from this journey of making the film, I feel like there's even by kind of like documenting the story of your own community, there's always the space of self-discovery. It's like not just telling stories of people you're familiar with, but getting to know different people and listening to the stories. There are always new kind of like aspects or perspectives you can learn from them. And to be honest, I just came to US for college. I think you mentioned this before. I've actually not consider myself an AAPI person before. There's the kind of one of the motivations of making this film is also that kind of seeing the Chinese or Asian American communities around me. I really want to learn about their experience and what kind of differences they have with my own experience growing up in China, finishing my high school in China. So I'd say like this is like, I think this is one great thing about making a documentary is like you kind of learn from the people. I have more thoughts about my own community and my own identity, living cross-culturally in the US, but from China. So I guess, I mean, this is my first film, but I guess this is like really pushing me on this journey of making more films in the future, self-discovery. So
yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
No, that's great. Kelly, you were about to say something as well.
Yeah. I mean, I really agree with what everyone said about I think for me, I'm a first-time filmmaker as well, and I'm not American, but I think I'm typically quite drawn to stories from the fringes, like stories that are lesser told. And I think that's what all of us are talking about right now. And I think for Curtain Up specifically, I think Hui and I sort of like resonated with the kids in different ways, and that culturally and just like linguistically or whatever, and that sort of enabled us to tell their story. And I guess what we hope is that our viewers would see a part of themselves in these kids as well, regardless of what color, what community you come from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some of these themes and the characters and emotions, experiences are universal. I'm going to kind of move this into current day and some of the things we've been dealing with in the pandemic. And also, as we've seen, unfortunately, a recent wave of hate crimes against AAPIs and just rising xenophobia. How are you dealing with it or addressing it? And how do you hope as filmmakers we can help address the things that we're seeing in the news?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things as storytellers is raising awareness, about what's happening. And I think, so much goes unreported as well. This is the case, in all kinds of, cases of vandalism and prejudice and violence against minority communities. When it comes to anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, even that, so many of these cases, of violence against these communities goes unreported. So I think the big thing as storytellers, as filmmakers, is to be able to raise awareness about these things and to really show what the reality truly is. I think that today, with the rise and proliferation of like cell phone footage and just other types of footage that we've been seeing of Asian American attacks, it's been quite shocking for people to view this footage. But at the same time, it's something that we need to be aware of. And so I'm hoping that throughout all of this negativity that we're seeing, that we will start seeing more stories coming out about this, and more coverage more time being spent to cover this story as well. But I think that's the main thing, is that we can just try to raise awareness by telling stories about it.
Yeah, I mean, when we were working on our film Far East Deep South, I mean, we, as you all know, it takes several years to make your documentaries. We started it 5 years ago, and yet we knew about the identity issues and the perpetual foreigner stereotypes. It's not like people thought we didn't belong here just yesterday. This has been something that has happened for a very, very long time. And so I think as filmmakers, we just happen to be in this moment where people are now paying attention to our stories. And like you mentioned, Razi, it's being captured on camera. Before it was like, if a forest falls in a tree, does it make a sound? And now we're seeing that these fears and this racism is actually real. Anyone else want to chime in on kind of how your films, or how films in general, can address some of the news today?
I'll jump in since no one else is talking.
Yes,
will
go
you
ahead.
allow me? Can I?
I will let you.
Okay. I mean, I think our community, the API community, needs to just understand that all these years, all these generations that we've been told to like keep our heads down and be silent, work through it, and everything will be all right. It only goes so far, and at some point we can't stay silent. We can't just hope that things will get better by not saying or doing anything. And I think that's why I love seeing all of you, is that being filmmakers allows us a step to not be silent, right? And sometimes I think culturally, and maybe just through the years of whether it's the model minority myth that has been pushed onto us, or if it's within our own culture to suppress our own feelings and voice. I hope that the storytelling will at least give us that first step to say like, okay, maybe this is my first opportunity to not be silent. Maybe being silent and just working hard isn't good enough. And maybe if everyone else sees that we can speak up and we can learn from other community groups that have raised activism, and we can learn from those communities, then maybe we can even join together with other groups and show unity and not have to perpetuate this silence that we've always had.
All right. I let you talk.
Okay,
yes, yeah. We're married, by the way, if you're just joining us, you didn't know that. He's my co-producer of Far East Deep South. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. I'm going to ask you guys one last question, kind of go around the horn with everyone. Why should people watch your film? We'll start with Razi and Justin.
Sure. I mean, I think it's an American story. It's a quintessential American story. And Hamtramck is a town that's very unique, but at the same time, this is a story of many, many towns across the United States in every corner of the country. So it's a story about shifting demographics, but it's also a story about what reality is like in the United States today. And our hope with the film is to raise awareness about issues around multiculturalism, Islamophobia, immigration, refugees, and kind of some of the issues that they experience in their lives. And these are not unique issues to just those communities. These are American issues. And so we hope that the film will facilitate some more meaningful and deeper conversations around these topics. So that's why you should watch our film.
Anything to add, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a look into small town politics. And we really wanted to kind of encourage people that, politics isn't just something you do every 4 years when the presidential election comes up. It's something that you can do on a local level today, any day, to get involved in your local community and really create change on a grassroots level is something that we can all do. And so we really wanted to encourage anyone who to see the film and see kind of, you know, this is where politics really begins. It's right outside your front door, and, you know, go for it.
That sounds good to me. Okay, team from Curtain Up, Hui and Kelly, why should people watch your film?
Well, I think there are a lot of like universal aspects of the story of Curtain Up. Basically, you know, it's about theater education, it's about parenting and, you know, supporting your children's dreams. It's also about, you know, kids growing up. And I think also, as people talk about, it's kind of going beyond just the AAPI community. But also, I think most importantly is because the school has been closed for so long for the pandemic. And, you know, we have to watch how the school life is going on, you know, and what's going on before this. And people can kind of get back naturally to their school life and, you know, can kind of like remember how life was before. So yeah, that's.
Yes, remember those days when kids got to go to school all together. Kelly, any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, I think diversity and representation is not like in theater, in art, in the arts too, is not a new topic, but there's something precious about seeing it from the perspectives of kids, and even just knowing that this is something that they think about, that, you know, is important to them. And yeah, and they present it in a very adorable way. So I hope everyone will catch our film and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And Yi, first vote, why should people watch?
Well, I'll start by sharing recent census data that 59.7% of AAPIs actually voted in the 2020 election, which is a 10% increase from 2016. So the film is about the power and diversity of the Asian American electorate, which is the fastest growing and margin of victory in an increasing number of battleground states. And I think you asked about impact, Larissa, that I meant to add to that, because the film actually premiered a year ago, and the encore broadcast is on May 18th. So we actually have partnered with national and local civic engagement organizations to reach eligible Asian American voters in key battleground states through more than 40 impact screenings and conversations to support their efforts to increase Asian American voter outreach, voter registration, and turnout in November 2020. And that's something that we will continue to do and hope to engage more partners to address the unique needs and challenges of Asian American voters, and work towards the vision that every Asian American voter has an equal opportunity to vote in every election. So besides that, I want to say that it's actually a very engaging film. It will take you on an emotional journey. And if you are curious about Asian or American voters on both sides, why they vote the way they do, this is the film, and it's a very engaging watch. You will enjoy watching it.
Yes, all the films are very enjoyable to watch.
All right, I'm going to take over here because she let me talk. So thank you, all you panelists, for your stuff that you've talked about, everything you've said. But now I'm going to ask you, why should you and why should everyone else out there watch Far East Deep South? I'm taking over hosting.
Okay, I see. We're switching it up here. Well, I think people should watch Far East Deep South because your dad is apparently adorable, and you've got adorable kids, and you've got an adorable senior citizen in our film who goes through this emotional journey, growing up fatherless, to reconnect with his roots, and this very surprising journey to discover this history that he never knew, not just about his family, about this part of American history. And more importantly, you will learn something. And from a human level, you will learn something. From a historical level, you will learn something. And I think you'll be better for it when you get to the end of the film. And there's lots of surprises. So if you like a good mystery and you like surprises and twists and turns, definitely our film is one to watch. And what we really hope to do is make an impact on the education community. So if you have seen our film, and after you've seen our film, you can want to reach out to us at fareastdeepsouth.com. Please join our education campaign to get our film into schools, and also to broaden the way we teach American history to be more inclusive. So that's why people should watch our film.
All right, should I close it out now, or do you think you probably?
I'm gonna close it out.
Yeah, you
first
probably do a
off,
better
I
job.
want to thank all our panelists. We have all kind of gone through the same film festival circuit, but this time it's been virtually. So it's like the first time we've all kind of been in this like same area, even though it's virtual. So I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank World Channel and America Reframed for showing our films and also hosting this event. They've got more events coming up on May 13th and May 20th. Please join these events and check out the screen right there. The registration and to learn more details about these events, please go to worldchannel.org. There's a Stop AAPI Hate event and also a Q&A with Pacific Heartbeat Stan. And we want to make sure that you stay up to date with everything. So again, all the films are available. Either they will be airing this month if they haven't aired already on World Channel. Please go to the World Channel website to check out the schedules, or they are streaming like our film Far East Deep South, which aired last week or this past week, is now streaming available at worldchannel.org. I hope you've had a wonderful time with us, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Stay safe and healthy. There are so many wonderful AAPI stories that we hope you'll explore, and such as the new season of Pacific Heartbeat on World Channel and PBS. And we're going to give you a sneak peek right now.